Hello and welcome to this Forth Valley and West Lothian supported study resource session. My name is Mr. Smith and today's session is going to focus on National 5 Modern Studies, the knowledge and understanding questions. The learning intention for today's session is to develop our understanding of the KU exam technique. In order for to be successful today, we will look at opportunities to create revision notes on key areas of your Modern Studies National 5 course. This study support session will also give you the support to be able to apply the content to subject-specific KU answers, using the P process for both describe and explain questions. Today we will also look at a range of model answers across the National 5 course, using our learning to evaluate and improve our responses. We will also comment on some of the general pitfalls to help give you the best possible advantage in advance of your National 5 exam or assessment. Throughout today's session, you will see various symbols on the slides to indicate what you should do. Here are some of the symbols which may be used and what they mean. They will be dotted throughout this presentation. The resources that you need for today's session are a jotter or paper, and quite simply, something to write with. Taking a look forward to a potential full National 5 exam or assessment, these will be worth 80 marks, will last for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and will require you to complete 3 sections. A National 5 exam or assessment is likely to be divided into democracy, social issues, and international units. And they will be further divided into different topics. So some of you may have studied democracy in the UK, and others will have studied democracy in Scotland. Some of you may have looked at international issues, or a particular world power, for example, the USA or China. If you have looked at social issues, it is likely that you may have looked at either crime and law or social inequality. It is important that you carefully read the instructions at the start of your exam or assessment, and this will save you time and confusion in the long run, so long as you are only answering the questions you are required to do. So what might an SQA style National 5 exam paper look like? On the screen you will see a front page. You will see the different sections and a little reminder here that you should attempt either Part A or Part B. And the example I'm showing you is for you to consider whether you have done democracy in Scotland or democracy in the United Kingdom. Having a look at the different questions, note that there will be some very little differences between the questions, especially in the democracy unit. Therefore, it is important that you carefully ensure you're answering the right section. So what type of questions will you have to answer in a National 5 exam? Well, as today's session is focusing on knowledge and understanding, we will look in detail first at describe and later in the session at explain questions, but you will also have one of each of the 3 skills-based questions. These are conclusions, options, and support opposed questions. Let's have a little look at some background information for described questions. These questions are worth either 4 or 6 marks. You will get at least one described question in each section of your assessment. And the purpose of described questions is to simply describe a particular issue, stating facts people have taken, for instance. You should try to avoid using first person, the word I, and you should use up-to-date relevant examples where possible. One tip is to ensure you have read the question carefully so that you are answering the question and not just something that you know about the topic that you may have studied in class. Another tip is to watch your timing. You will have roughly 1.5 to 2 minutes per mark. So for example, you should be spending roughly 10 to 12 minutes answering a 6-mark question. So what structure do we use and how do we answer described questions in National 5 Modern Studies? Well, we use what is known as the P process. So for described questions, a reminder, they're worth 4 or 6 marks. So we want to P, point, name a particular event or action for 1 mark. We want to explain, giving further details, describing more about the particular event or action for a 2nd mark. And if possible, we want to provide an example or some evidence to support this. Each P paragraph can allow you to achieve up to 3 marks. Note at this point, it may be worthwhile taking a note in your own jotter of this process. And now we're going to have a little look at perhaps how you may answer one of the 4-mark described questions. You make your point, which answers the question for a mark, and you give further details about that event or action. By repeating this process twice, you can achieve 4 marks. Note that this allows you to avoid giving examples where possible, but you should repeat this process twice. For a 6-mark response, the process is very similar. You're looking to make your point for a mark. You're looking to back that up with some further details, i.e. explaining it a little bit further. And you're looking to provide an example or evidence which supports your answer. For 6 marks, you're looking to repeat this process twice. To avoid the general pitfall of not writing enough in your assessment, or writing too much in some instances, aim for 1 sentence per mark. So let's have a little look at an example question taken from the 2019 SQA paper. Question 11 we're going to look at here, which is taken from the Social Issues unit. You may wish to practice this question if you have studied crime and law. If you have studied social inequality, you will still benefit from looking at this example, as you may also be asked to describe causes of inequality or poverty. So when we're looking at this question, it's important to think that we are being asked about biological causes. A little tip here is that this question could have asked us about social or economic causes of crime as well. Or it could have just generally asked about causes without mentioning biological, social, or economic. It's also important to note that this question is worth 4 marks, so using the process that we have learned to achieve 4 marks. It is important that we follow the P structure as far as possible. And you now have a task to complete. I would like you to outline up to 3 biological factors which can cause crime, and to provide further detailed descriptions of each factor, including examples where possible. You should pause this video at this point and have a go at completing this in your jotter. So now let's have a look at a model answer for this question. We want to begin by writing something like this. 1 biological cause of crime is nature, for 1 mark. We then want to give further details. We may use the words "this means" to begin our explanation sentence. This means some people believe that criminals are born evil and that they are psychologically distinct from non-criminals. Providing this further detail gets you a 2nd mark. If this question was worth 6 marks, we would then wish to add an example. As it is only worth 4 marks, you may also achieve full marks by just going and doing another point and another explanation without the need for examples. But for example purposes, we will include an example with this question. For example, they argue that criminals have no choice, it is nature and they have no control over it. So let's have a look at an overall model answer for you to copy down. 1 biological cause of crime is nature. This means people believe that criminals are born evil and they are psychologically distinct from non-criminals. For example, they would argue that criminals have no choice, it is nature, and they have no control over it. You would then like to repeat this process a second time to get up to 6 marks if the question was worth that many. Another biological cause of crime is sex. This means some people believe your sex and hormone level determines someone's level of aggression, making men more likely to commit crimes. For example, around 90% of all prisoners locked up in Scotland are male compared to 10% who are female. If you take out both of the example sentences here, then you will still achieve full marks for the 4-mark question. Note, it is always really important to look to see how many marks the question is worth when you are reading the question. So now let's have a look at another example question, this time taken from the International Issues, the World Powers section of the exam. From the 2016 past paper, this is question 13, and it's asking you to describe in detail 2 political rights that the citizens have in the world power you have studied. Here are the questions mentioning that you need to give 2 political rights, therefore 2p paragraphs. And the question is also clearly stating that you must state the world power you have studied. So for example, you may miss out on marks if you do not mention that the world power you have studied is the USA, or is China, for example. One tip about this particular question is to think about political rights as ways citizens can participate in politics. We're now going to move on to another task, this time taken from the international section of the exam, the World Powers Unit. At this point, it is worth noting that this recorded study guide will touch on areas that are commonly studied by schools across Scotland. However, the actual key emphasis of this session is to focus on building our exam technique, not the particular examples of content we talk about. So if we've not learned about the USA or China in terms of world powers, or if you have studied an international issue such as terrorism, do not let that put you off continuing with this supported study session. What I'm looking for you guys to do is to take 7 minutes to create a mind map of all the ways that people can participate in politics in the world power you have studied. And you should then aim to include details and examples which back that up. When you're taking notes on any aspect of learning in modern studies, it is really helpful to ask yourself, have you included enough information in your notes to be able to complete a full describe or explain question? Think about the P process when you're doing this. Think again about the statistics and numbers you have. Do you have years that might be important? Do you have percentages? Do you know major events or people? In this case, you may wish to ensure that you can provide enough details of what different types of elections people can stand in, which parties they may stand for, and examples of people who have stood for election, when, and the results. Furthermore, you may wish to take notes on examples of protesting if it's allowed in the world power you have studied. Thinking about who protests, why, and when. You may wish to pause this video at this point to complete that task. If you've completed the task, there are some examples on the screen of the types of answers that you might have. For example, in China, when we're looking at ways that people can participate in politics, we could have information on standing as a candidate in village elections, we could have voting in village elections, and we could have joining the Chinese Communist Party, or CPC. If we have studied the USA as a world power, we may have talked about standing as a candidate and given examples of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, perhaps, or the other roles that people can stand as a candidate for. We may have taken notes on voting or protesting. If you have not studied world powers, you may continue to take notes on issues relating to international issues such as terrorism at this point. We're now going to have a go at another task. In this case, a spot the difference activity. What I would like you to do is to read the responses and weigh up, in other words evaluate, which one you believe is stronger. Take a minute or two and think, can you explain why one is stronger than the other? Furthermore, you may wish to pause the video and have a go at thinking, how could we make the other response better or stronger? You may wish to pause this video at this point and have a go at that task. Now that you've had a go, response 1 would achieve 1 mark, response 2 would achieve 3. And one common pitfall to note here is the lack of detail in pupils' examples. In other words, what you should try to do is include details about your example as far as possible. So now it's your turn. Thinking about what we've seen in the last slide, rewrite the 1 mark response on the screen to make it stronger. In this case, what you should try to do is try to add detail to your Black Lives Matter example. Consider when, where, and who was involved and why. If you have studied another world power, such as China, can you add detail to an example of a protest from there? You should aim to add enough detail to achieve 3 marks in your response. You may wish to pause this video again at this point and have a go at expanding on your example. So have you been able to expand on your example? Have you been able to provide further details, whether it's a statistic of a year, whether it's a further piece of information about the Black Lives Matter protest or another protest in the USA or China or another world power? If you have done so, you have given yourself the best opportunity to ensure that you achieve that mark for your example. Now, to recap, I would recommend that you use this self-assessment checklist anytime you try to answer a described question to evaluate whether you've used the right process or not. Consider, have you included a point which answers the question? Have you included further description or details? Have you been able to support your description with a detailed example, as we've just discussed? And have you P'd the appropriate amount of times? In other words, if the question is worth 6 marks, ensure that you have done the full P process twice. Now that we have had plenty practice of the described question and the technique required, it's important to consider our next steps. You may wish to use the QR code or link to the SQA website below to have a go at some past paper questions. Try 1 or 2, taking your time, and then when you're more confident, have a go in timed conditions. Remember, the general rule is between 1.5 and 2 minutes per mark. Therefore, you should try to complete a 6-mark question in anywhere between 9 and 12 minutes. It's important to remember to focus on the areas that you have studied and to reflect and think about the areas of your learning that you'll most benefit from practicing. And you may wish at this point to complete some questions and then submit to your teacher for feedback. So now that we've had a look at the described questions, it's time to look at the ever so slightly more challenging explain questions which will crop up in your National 5 assessment. A little bit of background information about explain questions. Well, these can be worth between 4, 6 or even 8 marks. And the purpose of these questions is to explain why a particular event or action has happened. And for that reason, we would look to be using the word because to do this. Unlike described questions, we want to not use the word I or first person, and we do want to use up-to-date relevant examples and statistics where possible. Again, it's important to ensure you read the question carefully and to watch your timing too. For example, an 8-mark explain question, you should be looking to take roughly 14 minutes to complete this. So how do we answer an explain question? Well, in the same fashion as we would with a describe question, we will use the P process, point, explain, example. You want to name a particular cause or action for 1 mark, and you want to explain exactly why this affected a certain issue by using the word because for your 2nd mark. And then you want to give a real-life example or evidence to support this once more. At this point, you may wish to copy this structure down again into your jotter. So like the describe question, we will use the P process. For a 6-mark response, we will do this twice. And for an 8-mark response, we should complete this process 3 times. Again, a reminder of the general pitfall to ensure that you do not write too much or too little. You should be aiming for roughly 1 sentence per mark on offer. So let's have a look at an example explain question taken from the 2018 SQA paper. This is question 13. You have the statement, prisons are an effective punishment. Explain in detail 2 reasons why prisons are an effective punishment. And again, you'll be able to see that this question is worth 6 marks. That means that we need to P twice in our response. This question is asking why prisons are effective, but a tip is that it could actually be asking why prisons are not effective or why prisons are ineffective. So it is important that we frame our response using the wording of the question. Your task now is to create a table detailing reasons for and against the effectiveness of prisons, and to try to justify why you've put each factor under each heading. Again, if you have not studied the Crime and Law section of National 5 Modern Studies, you may wish to do some research into some aspects of the social inequality unit. You may wish to have a look at some past papers and consider the explain questions which crop up in that too. You may wish to pause this video at this point to complete these tasks. So now that we've looked at the question and completed that task, let's have a look at a model answer for an explain question and consider how it's slightly different from that of a describe. One reason why prisons are an effective punishment is because they remove dangerous people from society. What we've done here is we have used the wording of the question to begin our point. We then want to add further details to explain why that makes prisons effective. This makes prisons effective because people who commit murders are given life sentences and often sent to high security prisons, meaning they can no longer cause danger to the public. This will allow you to achieve your 2nd mark, and note the word because is in this section. You will also see that the level of detail and the information that you need is just that little bit more challenging than perhaps for a describe response. Now having a look at our example. For example, in 2015, Karen Buckley's murderer, Alexander Paktu, was sentenced to 23 years in jail, and that will allow you to achieve your 3rd mark. So now having a look at an overall 6-mark response for you to copy as a model answer in your jotter, we could talk about the fact that they remove dangerous people from society and expand on that, given reasons why, and again using our 2nd P paragraph to talk about the fact that prisons can offer people the chance to rehabilitate and learn and cope with life outside of prison. Again, you'll be able to see here, this is effective because, and an example that's relevant to the question too. Moving on, let's have a look at another example question, this time question 17, from the 2018 SQA paper. Some groups are underrepresented in politics. Explain in detail 2 reasons why some groups are underrepresented in politics. And in your answer, you must state the world power you have studied. So again, this question comes from the World Powers Unit, but there are several things that we must consider before going on to answer. Breaking down this question, we'll see that it's asking for 2 reasons, so 2 P paragraphs once again. And it's asking you to think about some groups. So to be able to answer this question, we need to think about which groups are underrepresented and why they are underrepresented. And a reminder that during your World Powers unit, you may be asked to state the world power that you have studied in your responses. So you should aim to identify the group and the world power within your response sentence. You may then wish to go on to write 1 or 2 explained sentences, explaining why perhaps women, for example, are underrepresented. And then for your 3rd mark, you want to provide evidence or an example to support your explanation. And this now leads us on to another short task linking to the World Powers unit. You should take 7 minutes to create a mind map in your jotter, identifying groups who are underrepresented in the world power you have studied. For example, this could be women in the USA, it may be women in China too. If you can, try to include an explanation why and some evidence to support where possible. You may wish to pause this video now and have a go at completing this task in 7 minutes in your jotter. You may now see on the screen that we have some examples of groups who are underrepresented in both the USA and China. This list is not exhaustive. There are plenty others that you could have, but the main groups that we might want to consider today, if we're talking about the USA, are young people, ethnic minorities, and women. Again, if we're having a look at China, we've studied China, groups who are underrepresented could be rural workers, it could be people who are not members of the CPC or who are not communist, or it might be migrants. You may have learned about other groups, and that is also totally fine. Like what we did in the describe section, we're also going to do another task, spot the difference. So your task is to read the 2 responses on the screen, and once more to evaluate and weigh up which one is stronger. And again, can you explain why that's the case? And then I wish for you to think about how could we make the other response a little bit stronger. You may wish to pause this clip at this point and have a go at completing that task yourself. Response 1 would be worth 3 marks. Response 2 in this case would be worth just the 1 mark. So remember to get into the habit of using the word because within your response. You will see that in response 2 that is not the case. For example, women are underrepresented because men dominate the CPC. And then look to add more concise, detailed knowledge. Rather than just saying something like the main party, actually go on to name the CPC and give reasons why women are underrepresented. So now it's your turn to have a go at a task like this. You have the first response here. Your task is to rewrite the 1 mark response to make it stronger based on the tips that you have just received. You should aim to add enough detail to achieve 3 marks this time round. Remember to use the wording of the question and state the name of the world power you have studied. For example, one group who are underrepresented in China is, and give a reason why, i.e. because. You may wish to pause this clip here and have a go at completing that task in your jotter. Thinking about how long you have to complete a 6 mark response, you should be looking to complete 1 P paragraph in approximately 4 or 5 minutes here. Now let's talk a little bit more about explained questions. And the reason for that is because each of the 3 sections in your National 5 assessment will have 3 questions. And one of these sections will actually have 4 questions, an A and a B. And you can choose which one of these you want to complete. Now, note that these questions are worth 8 marks. And what that means is that you're required to write 3 P paragraphs. Now, quite often these 8-mark choice questions are designed to be challenging and may require you to think more about how you can apply your learning in class in a new way or to a particularly challenging question. Now, the reason that SQA include questions like this is designed to challenge the really strong National 5 candidates. So in other words, in most sections you will have 4-mark describe questions, maybe some 6-mark describe and explain questions, and in one section of your assessment at complete random, you may have the more challenging choice of 2 8-mark questions to complete. However, the key to answering these questions again is to follow the P structure. Once more, to recap, you should use this self-assessment checklist any time you answer an explain question to evaluate whether you followed the correct process. So once again, it would be good to get yourself into the habit of asking yourself, have you included a point which answers the question directly? Have you included an explanation as to why a particular event or action has happened? And therefore, have you included the word because somewhere within that section of your response? And have you, a little bit like the describe questions, been able to back it up with an example where possible? Also, ensure that you have P'd the appropriate amount of times, whether it's 2 or 3 times based on the 6 or 8-mark responses. Now to your next steps for explain questions. Again, you can use the QR code or link below to the SQA website to have a go at a range of past paper questions and to try 1 or 2 taking your time, and then when you're more confident, consider completing these in timed conditions. Remember to focus on areas that you have studied in class and to reflect and think about areas of your learning which you'll most benefit from practicing. And once more, a reminder that your teacher should be happy to provide you with feedback on your responses. Now that we've looked in detail at both describe and explain questions across a range of different units that we may study in National 5 Modern Studies, we're going to just go that little bit further. What we're going to do is have a little look at a couple of example questions from the democracy section of our exam and just have a little think about how we're going to answer the 2 questions on the screen differently. Note that the 2 questions are very similar in that they both talk about the same area of the Democracy in Scotland course. And again, note here that if you have studied democracy in the UK, that the words First Minister are interchangeable with Prime Minister. So lots of you who've studied democracy in the UK will be able to answer the questions, describe in detail the role and powers of the Prime Minister for 6 marks, and explain in detail why the Prime Minister is powerful. But for this example's purposes, we're going to talk about it from the democracy in Scotland perspective and therefore talk about the First Minister. But any time we talk about the First Minister over the next few minutes, and if you've done the democracy in the UK topic, you can talk about democracy in the UK and the Prime Minister, Let's have a little look at a task which will help us develop our knowledge and understanding of the areas the First Minister is responsible for in Scotland. Your task is to take 10 minutes this time to copy and complete the following table and to include detailed descriptions and explanations. So in the first column in your table, use your notes and your own revision materials to describe the roles and powers of the First Minister. In the middle section in green here, explain what makes the First Minister, in this case Nicola Sturgeon, powerful. And then in the final red section of your table, can you explain reasons why the First Minister may be viewed as less powerful? Again, to remind you, if you've done democracy in the UK, you might want to consider the roles and powers of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Note that often the roles and powers can link very closely to what makes the First Minister powerful or not, and the difference here is how you word your response. You may wish to pause and have a go at completing this task for 10 minutes just now. Okay, now that you've completed that task, you may wish to self-evaluate what you have learned against the examples on the screen in the now pre-filled out table. So having a look at a couple of examples of the roles and powers of the First Minister. Well, Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister leads the Scottish Government and she represents Scotland abroad. She also appoints cabinet secretaries and government ministers. We then want to think the more challenging aspect here. Can we give reasons why the First Minister is powerful? And you'll see that to get you into the habit, I have given you examples with the word because at the start. So the First Minister may be viewed as powerful because she has the final decision on what each government department does, and she can approve and reject policies. She's powerful because she will approve deals with other parties, and because the First Minister has the power to reward those loyal to her, or punish or remove those who she doesn't think are good enough. However, on the other hand, what makes the First Minister less powerful? Well, because she is only responsible for devolved matters and not reserved matters, because she has to agree to pass bills in Parliament, and because she must answer to Parliament. Note here the very subtle differences between the roles and powers and what makes the First Minister powerful. Both are talking about cabinet secretaries and government ministers. Your next task is to have a look at the two questions and have a go at writing 1P paragraph for each, using your table that we've just talked about to help. You may wish to pause the video here and complete this final task today. Now, very briefly, before we finish up, we're going to have a little look at a model answer for each of these questions. First of all, note the first one is asking you to describe, so you should use your learning from today to follow the describe process. And the question is worth 6 marks, requiring 2P paragraphs. You then have an explain question, so you should go back and use your knowledge and understanding of how to answer explain questions. And note again that this question is worth 8 marks, requiring you to do 3P paragraphs. One of your paragraphs may look like this. One role of the First Minister is to appoint cabinet secretaries and government ministers to the Scottish Government. Again, note the wording we've used. This means, as First Minister, they will select other MSPs from the Scottish Parliament to take responsibility for the different departments of the Scottish Government. And if you've taken detailed notes, you will be able to back that up with an example. For example, John Swinney has been appointed as the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education, which is why he announced the 2020 exams were cancelled. Note the question is very similar, but it's explained, so why is the First Minister powerful? One reason the First Minister is powerful is because they can appoint and remove cabinet members. Provide further details about that. As the First Minister, one of her roles is to choose who is in charge of each department, meaning she has the power to reward those loyal to her and punish or remove those who she does not think are good enough. Again, you may wish to use a similar example to back up your explanation. For example, John Swinney has been appointed as the Deputy First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for Education, as he has been a loyal ally to her. You'll note here the questions are very similar, but the way that you structure your response and the way that you use the information is ever so slightly different. So now to review today's learning. Throughout this lesson, we have looked at a range of commonly studied National 5 units in order to demonstrate the technique for describe and explain KU questions. We have covered useful tips as well as highlighting common pitfalls that lots of pupils fall foul to. We have also had a look at how to answer questions that have only slight differences, but instruct you to use the information in completely different ways. You have also been presented with a takeaway checklist for self-assessment purposes that you should consider using any time you practice KU describe and explain questions. Overall, to review this recorded supported study lesson, we need to self-assess our progress against today's success criteria. So I wish for you to rate your learning today out of 5 against each of the success criteria on the screen. 5 being clear and confident, with 1 being unsure and requiring more support. Please use this self-assessment to get the appropriate support from your class teacher. Finally, you may wish to visit the SQA website anytime to attempt a range of past paper questions, both for KU questions, but also for inquiry skills questions. You should look to practice these in time conditions as well to refine the skill. Furthermore, if you want to have a little bit of fun, why don't you have a shot at the task below to help you build up your example bank, which will contribute to your knowledge marks. Identify an example to go with each of the emojis linking to the different units that you may study in Modern Studies. Finally, I would just like to say thank you for taking your time to make use of this supported study resource video. I hope it was useful for your learning, and I want to wish you good luck with your upcoming assessments. Thank you.